Hello and welcome to MIP TV. And with me, sat in his kitchen, is the fantastic Bob Cook from the Manchester Institute for Psychotherapy. And he's going to do another book review. And this is a really interesting book, relatively new, 2000. And it is, reading from my notes, an integrative developmental model of supervision by Stolenberg, McNeil and Delworth.
Yes.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about that, Bob.
One of my famous books. Well, I didn't write it, but Stoltenberg, Delworth, and McNeil. Stoltenberg and Delworth, Swedish researchers into supervision. And they spent over a decade researching this book. Over 1,000 therapists they talked to. And why I like it particularly is it addresses the developmental aspect of supervision. So for therapists who actually want to add supervision to their profile, they need to understand models of supervision. And this one addresses the idea that therapists who come into supervision and looking for supervisors need to have somebody who addresses their developmental processes, i.e. people who are beginning therapists need supervisors who are attuned to the tasks of people who've been in therapy or practicing in therapies for 2 or 3 years. People who've been going for 9, 10 years will need different developmental tasks which are addressed by the supervisor. The supervisor needs to think developmentally.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting to say that. I supervise and I see a lot of students and the work I do with students initially when they first go into practice or for the first few years of their professional engagement is completely different to the more experienced therapists that I also see. They need different things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you think of the beginning therapist, say the therapist who starts in the placements or work experience for the first time. So it's their first venture into the therapeutic dialogue. What they need of a supervisor is a supervisor that understands their developmental processes. For example, their need for structure, their need to really get a right or wrong answer. The need of a supervisor will help them contain their anxieties, their curiosities, their many multifaceted questions for the first time. Their need, if you like, to have treatment planning, to ask those amazingly beginning questions, if you like. So the supervisor would need to really be attuned to the fears, anxieties, being a container for these early developmental questions of the therapist that's just started out in practice.
Yes, and sometimes that's referred to as the formative side of things, isn't it? Where...
Yeah. And if you think back to when you started to see clients for the first time, you were a very different animal to the animal that you are now.
Oh, yeah.
A seasoned professional.
Yes.
Really has been around for a long time, learned by their mistakes. You need a completely different type of supervisor who will stretch you in different developmental ways.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that is risk, isn't it? About, sometimes, more experienced therapists will take more of a risk in the relationship than maybe a newer therapist. So in terms of the book, Bob, how does it help a supervisor? What do you think it informs someone who's supervising?
Okay. So in the book, they talk about 4 different levels. Level 1, level 2, level 3, and 3 integrated. Very originally, isn't it? 1, 2, 3, and 3 integrated. But
Yes.
Anyway, Hawkinson showed it writing earlier on. They talked about a developmental model where they had I like the creative names like novice, the intermediate stage, the master practitioner. So they had a developmental model as well. This model coming later is better researched. I think it's they've researched many more numbers, if you like. But for a beginning supervisor to have a developmental model which spells out what to look for in each particular developmental phase is really important. So, for example, somebody who's in the what they call level 3, which is a therapist that's been around for 10 to 15 years, then that type of therapist will look for example, a supervisor that can help them talk at a collegial level, help them talk across different multi-perspectives,
Yes.
Like client-centered perspective, a transactional perspective, a gestalt, an existential, and help talk along with different platforms, which is very different from what a beginning therapist would need.
Yes. So, a more experienced therapist may need supervisor who has an understanding of the different meta models.
Correct. And things like the ideas of transference, for example.
Yes.
So somebody who's just started out, the idea of transference can be quite vague and quite, pardon my language, quite woolly. But as the more experienced therapist who's been around many years, they often need this more psychodynamic approach, which the supervisor can take, and look at the sophisticated concepts of transference, which a beginning therapist may get lost in.
Yeah, absolutely. So a real good book for those people who may be supervising, maybe undertaking a course in supervision.
Yes, definitely. I mean, as you know, I do a supervision course, a certificate supervision course at the Institute, where this book is on the reading list and is explained and talked about. So it's very important. You just think of the concept of ethics, for example. So beginning therapists often don't know when they're being ethical or not. Now, that might seem hard to believe.
True, though. True.
But the supervisor needs to act as a gatekeeper.
Yeah.
Across all levels, but specifically, I think, for the beginning therapist who needs the supervisor to be more directive,
yes,
to be looking out for these things. Now, as they go on, of course, and as the therapist gets more experienced, they're more sensitive to ethical issues. They've really carried their journey, if you like, but they still need the supervisor to help them be aware of exploring, if you like, the grey area of ethics.
Yes, because it is, as you quite rightly say, Bob, a grey area. It is very. I mean, there's some things that there's no interpretation needed, but in some areas, it needs a lot of thought. And certainly that's my experience of being a supervisor. So a really good book for those people who are undertaking supervision courses, and maybe those people who are already qualified supervisors.
Yes.
A good book just to kind of think, maybe I need just because most are taught seven-eyed model, Hawkins and Shoat. Maybe I need to kind of turbocharge or kind of have a different perspective. I don't know if we turbocharge ourselves, but just a different perspective on supervision and just see it from a different viewpoint, which is always good, isn't it?
Because if you're going to add supervision to your profile, just said, then you need to understand that different therapists that come along will have different needs according to their levels of practice.
So, So a really good book for supervisors or trainee supervisors. As always, we'll put a link in the bar below, in the little place below, and at the end of the video, I'm going to point this way, probably that way. We're going to left and right.
It's number 36.
And it's number 36. So we'll put a picture of the book so people know what they're looking for if they want to buy it. As always, this isn't a paid kind of product placement. Bob does this for his love of sharing with the world his literature and his polymathic knowledge of psychotherapy. And as always, Bob, thank you very much.
You're welcome.